What's going on, guys? Billy here, and after about a year, DJI has just refreshed their Mavic Air 2 with this drone right here, the Air 2S. It features a lot of the same characteristics as the Mavic Air 2 with a very familiar design as well as a remote controller that's basically identical except for a few cosmetic changes that were introduced with the Mini 2, but it does also introduce a few very big upgrades. It's almost like the release of the Mavic Pro Platinum after the original Mavic Pro released. I think that mid-cycle refresh came out about a year or a year and a half after the release of the original drone, but I think the general consensus in the community was that didn't really warrant a new drone. There wasn't many upgrades in that mid-cycle refresh, but this go around, as the title states, with the Air 2S, it features a lot of very big upgrades, especially for being a mid-cycle refresh. So there's three things that I'm really going to be focusing on here in this video that make the Air 2S stand out, and they are the brand new camera, the O3 or OcuSync 3 transmission system, and the new sensor layout, which is really intuitive. All of these upgrades really shake up DJI's entire drone lineup as this drone creeps up on the higher end Mavic 2 Pro, but we'll get more into that later. So to get things going here, let's work our way backwards down my list of the three major upgrades introduced in the Air 2S. So that means that we're going to kick things off with these new sensors located on the top side of the drone. Now at first, I thought it was a joke. This really doesn't look right when you first set your eyes on it, but having these sensors positioned in the way that they are adds another level of functionality that I quite frankly didn't even think of. And because of the way that these are positioned so close to each other on the front, I've got to say that this is the best obstacle avoidance system that's been put in any DJI drone. But to understand why it's so good and how we got to this point, we've got to kind of take a history lesson of some of the previous drones that make up DJI's lineup. The Phantom 4 Pro here was the first drone from DJI to feature a full suite of obstacle avoidance sensors on the front, bottom, and backside of the aircraft. They also included infrared sensors on the side, which only worked in certain flight modes. The only direction that this drone could fly without picking up obstacles was upward, so this drone didn't technically have true omnidirectional obstacle avoidance. This all changed though with the Mavic 2 series of drones that added that top infrared sensor and swapped out the side infrared sensors on the Phantom 4 Pro for just a single obstacle avoidance sensor, although much like the Phantom 4 Pro, those side sensors only worked in certain flight modes where the drone was flying slower, so for example tripod mode. Now those two drones sit at the top of DJI's lineup as their highest end offerings. They are for the prosumers, but the Mavic Air lineup that I have sitting in front of me is a little bit different as it's their mid-tier option, right? It sits in between the Mini 2 and the Mavic 2 series. That original Mavic Air that dropped back in early 2018 introduced a set of backwards obstacle avoidance sensors, which was a first in DJI's foldable Mavic drones, but they didn't do that much at all to upgrade the suite of sensors in the newly designed Mavic Air 2, which also had a dual set of obstacle avoidance sensors in the front, the bottom, and the backside. The design obviously was different, but the functionality remained the same. Okay, so now that you've been brought up to date with the history of how DJI's obstacle avoidance system has shaped the different drones in their lineup, it's time to finally focus on the Air 2S and discuss these new sensors located on the top side of the drone, because it's a very intuitive concept, and I think that it kind of gives us a glimpse into a very promising future of obstacle avoidance in drones, not only in DJI's lineup, but in the entire industry. I think that this is a really good idea that a lot of other companies are going to borrow. So much like the Mavic Air 2, there are obstacle avoidance sensors on the back, the bottom, and the front, and now up here on the top of the drone, but those top sensors have two functions, as they also can look forwards, effectively giving us four sensors that look forward, detecting obstacles. If we take a closer look at these top sensors, they are ever so slightly angled forward so that when the drone is flying straight up, it can scan for obstacles above the aircraft, but when it's flying forwards, the pitch of the drone faces those sensors to also look forwards. Having these dual obstacle avoidance sensors on the top side of the drone is really beneficial for more reasons than one. So for example, it's a lot more reliable at detecting obstacles directly above the drone when it's flying vertically in that direction than that of, say, the Mavic 2 Pro that only has one single infrared sensor, and of course it's leaps and bounds better than the Mavic Air 2 that has no upward obstacle avoidance system of any kind. Now the Air 2S does also have an increased maximum vertical speed, so that's when it flies directly straight upwards, and I don't exactly know if that's because of these upward sensors. I would say that it is, because now it can detect the obstacles flying straight up. But just to give you an example, the Mavic Air 2 with no upwards obstacle avoidance system can fly directly upwards at a maximum vertical speed of 4 meters per second or 9.4 miles per hour, whereas the Air 2S can fly vertically at 6 meters per second or 13.4 miles per hour at its maximum vertical speed. And that's a pretty good increase. I mean, this drone was noticeably faster when flying flying directly straight up. Now on the topic of speed, because the Air 2S effectively has 4 forward obstacle avoidance sensors, the maximum horizontal speed with those sensors engaged with obstacle avoidance turned on has now increased. So the Mavic Air 2 with only 2 sensors had a max speed of 12 meters per second or 26 miles per hour with obstacle avoidance turned on. But now with the Air 2S, you can fly up to 15 meters per second or 34 miles per hour and still have that obstacle avoidance fully turned on and engaged so that it can stop and brake for any obstacles that you might hit. 34 miles an hour with all of the sensors still turned on is honestly a pretty big jump from the previous 26 miles an hour. I know that I can definitely feel a significant difference, and that's only like 8 miles an hour slower than the maximum speed in sport mode. So I hope that with this obstacle avoidance system in the future, we can have something that's really advanced that works at any speed when you're flying your drone. That would be pretty cool. But okay, enough about the sensors. We've talked way too much about them. We've gone way too in depth. Now it's time to move on to what I believe is probably the biggest change and biggest upgrade in this drone, and that is O3. And this is DJI's high-end transmission system. It used to be called OcuSync, but like we saw with their new FPV drone, it's been renamed to O3. So here's the thing. The O3 transmission system in DJI's FPV drone and this new Air 2S are very different. The version that is found in the FPV drone caters towards fast-paced first-person view flight, while the version found in the Air 2S is tuned to better serve GPS drone flyers. You almost can't even compare these two transmission systems because while they're the same, they're so different. You can tell that the version of O3 in the DJI FPV drone favors latency and frame rates, while the version of O3 in the Air 2S favors range and video quality in the downlink, and this makes perfect sense. I think that it's really cool to see that DJI is catering to both sides of the drone community, the FPV drone flyers, as well as the GPS drone flyers, by giving them their own dedicated version of O3. Would I take either of these systems in any drone? Yes, because they're really great and really reliable, but it's cool that they fine-tuned each individual version of O3 to cater and meet the needs of the different types of drone flyers. It really does show how in tune they are with the demands and the needs of the people that are flying different types of drones. Now let's swap out the FPV drone here for the Mavic Air 2 that uses OcuSync 2, just for a better understanding of how much of an upgrade O3 is. Now on paper, these two transmission systems are neck and neck with basically the same operating frequencies, the same downlink quality, the same bitrate, and the same latency. The one difference is that the range has been extended to 12 kilometers or 7.46 miles, as if 10 kilometers or 6.21 miles wasn't already enough. But more importantly, at the top of the list here, you'll see the Air 2S now features a quad antenna setup instead of a dual antenna setup. In my opinion, just like I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, this is by far the biggest upgrade that was made in the Air 2S. It's even bigger than that new camera system mounted on the front. The signal is just so strong, it's so crisp, clear, and reliable, even more so than OcuSync 2, which is really saying something. And spoiler alert, it's the reason I'm now choosing to fly the Air 2S over my Mavic 2 Pro, but don't worry, we'll go over more about that in another video coming later this week. Now, I remember back when DJI upgraded their new Mavic 2 series to OcuSync 2.0 from OcuSync 1.0 found in the original Mavic Pro, and the range increased by a little bit, which yeah, was great, but the biggest difference actually came in the fidelity of the signal. It was so much stronger and so much more reliable at shorter ranges, which I found to really be the biggest upgrade in that new transmission system. If we fast forward to today, right now, with the release of the Air 2S that comes with O3, it shows us that history is set to repeat itself. So as we saw in the transition from OcuSync 1 to OcuSync 2, sure, it was great. We had the increase in range that looked good on the spec sheet, but the real upgrade came in the fidelity and strength of the signal. Fast forward again to today with the transition from OcuSync 2 to O3, sure, it looks good on the spec sheet that we have a small bump in range. I don't know if you're ever going to use all of the range in this drone, but the real upgrade comes in the fidelity and strength of the signal. I'm sure that you guys are sick of me saying that by now, but if I show you a quick example of me flying about a mile out in a relatively urban area that is heavily coated with a lot of interference, the drone was handling great. There was no interference, there was no lag, there was no jump in the frame, there was no black frame to be had. It was perfect, a full 5 bars flying all the way out. And this right here, this upgrade in the transmission system really is worth the price of admission. Even if you have a Mavic 2 Pro, O3 crushes OcuSync 2 all day long. Now, speaking of the Mavic 2 Pro and its 1-inch sensor, I guess guess it's time to finally talk about this drone's 1-inch sensor, which I know is what everyone watching this video has been dying to hear about, even though I had to take the time to nerd out over the transmission system and that new obstacle avoidance system. So yes, the 1-inch sensor has made its way down from DJI's highest end drone lineup, but it's not necessarily better or worse than the Mavic 2 Pro's camera. I'm not going to spend time comparing drones in this video because I've got a video coming out in a few days doing just that, but solely looking at what the Air 2S offers in the spec category should really please both photo and video shooters. Now, I'm sure that most of the people watching this video are expecting me to hype this camera up and make a huge deal about it, but as a current Mavic 2 Pro owner, it's nothing that I really haven't seen before. The Mavic 2 Pro camera and Air 2S camera are very similar. Of course, it does have some slight improvements, like you get a wider field of view, you get a higher max bitrate, you get to shoot at a higher 5.4K resolution in video, and you get the option to shoot like 4K video at 60 frames per second. The one downside is it doesn't have that Hasselblad name on it, if that means anything to you, and it also doesn't have the adjustable aperture. It's fixed at f2.8, but at the end of the day, it's nothing revolutionary. I guess what is good though is that it's smaller and it's less expensive, right? So looking at some of the photos that I've taken from this drone, which as shown in this video have been edited, they're without a doubt some of the greatest looking aerial photos that I've taken from a foldable drone. They're very comparable to what the Mavic 2 Pro shoots because the specs when taking photos are very similar, but nonetheless they look great, allowing for a good amount of dynamic range when editing, nice crisp colors, a good even exposure, and really basically everything that DJI is really well known for in their cameras. Now, when you're working on the photos in post, they will take a little bit of getting used to. So for example, I tried to just apply a preset I use for my Mavic 2 Pro photos onto a photo taken with the Air 2S, and it was just way off. The camera on the Air 2S leans a little bit to the cooler side, which really isn't an issue, especially when you're shooting photos, but it's something that I figured I would note, as the Mavic 2 Pro is like the complete opposite. It leans more towards the warmer side. If you're interested in checking out these raw photos for yourself, be sure to check out the link in the description to download some sample files that I've provided for you to mess around with. Now, where the camera on the Air 2S really stands out is in the video department, as you get a higher max bitrate to allow for higher resolution video recording in 5.4K. You also get the ability to shoot in different color profiles. With 10-bit color, you get like D-Log and HLG, and also you can zoom in up to 8 times with this camera when shooting in 1080p. As you may know, I'm a huge proponent of shooting in the highest resolution possible when it comes to capturing aerial video. With a camera that is in the sky and that is typically further away from the subject in the frame, I want to capture as much detail as possible to then downsample when exporting in post, or to even crop in on if I have to. I found that 5.4K is really perfect for me because even if my goal is to export a 4K video, it gives me some wiggle room to crop in slightly and then export in 4K without losing any detail. Aside from the specs, DJI has continued to push forward with their camera software, and this drone is a perfect example, capturing a nice even exposure with great dynamic range and colors that are on point. For most of the video, I dabbled in shooting with the different color profiles, like mostly in D-Log, but if you want to check out some of the unedited 5.4K video for yourself, you can go ahead and check out the link in the description that's also in there with some of the photos. Aside from the overall video quality, another thing I'm absolutely loving about the Air 2S that really does pertain to video is the strength and the build quality of the gimbal. Yes, I know that that might sound a little bit different, but on an older drone like the Mavic 2 Pro, when flying in the maximum speed in sport mode, the gimbal would like kick down because the pitch of the drone was a little bit too far forwards, and then the top of the drone would get in the way of the camera. It was a total nightmare. But now with this gimbal, DJI's done a great job at redesigning it, so even when you're flying in the maximum speed in sport mode, you can keep your gimbal pitched at a perfect 0 degrees. There's no propellers in the frame, and that gimbal doesn't kick downwards, which is a really good thing when you're shooting cinematic video. You can even get away with tilting the gimbal up a couple of degrees, like maybe 2 or 3 degrees, but once you get to 4 degrees, the camera's going to shoot right down, but that's to be expected. So guys, there we have it. That wraps up the 3 major upgrades introduced here with the Air 2S. Those are really the 3 main things you need to know about this mid-cycle refresh of a drone, but I guess to kind of make sure we cover all of our bases, I suppose we should cover some of the other specs about this drone to understand what it's about. So real quick, as a note for some of you guys out there watching that might own an Air 2, I know that I'm going to get this comment and this question a lot. With the drones being so similar, the Mavic Air 2 batteries will work with this drone, which is a good sign. And like the design, most of the specs also remain unchanged. The one interesting thing that I'll point out here is that the advertised flight time has actually decreased here from 34 minutes on the Mavic Air 2 to 31 minutes on the Air 2S, which I guess could be as a result of more weight being added to the drone with the camera on the front. But speaking from overall experience though, that really hasn't made a huge difference at all. I still feel like I'm getting the same flight time out of my Air 2S as I do with the Mavic Air 2. Now, before we wrap this video up, there is one more thing I want to mention, and that is the new MasterShots mode available here inside of the Air 2S, which makes shooting cinematic video easier. So as you guys remember, oh God, I forget what drone they originally released it with, but DJI came out with these quick shots, right? So you could put the drone out in front of you, press a button, and it would perform some sort of cinematic movement, right? You had rocket, which would fly straight up. You had droney, which would fly straight away from you. You had circle, which would do a circle around you. But now with MasterShots, it's like an incredible upgrade over what originally was quick shots. Now, you do still have quick shots available, but just to give you an idea of what MasterShots does, you put the drone out in front of you, you select the subject, which in this case was just myself. This was actually my very first time doing it. I set all of the different parameters to large, so the drone would fly further away than if I said it's like medium or small. And the drone for 3 minutes just did all of these cinematic moves, right? It would fly backwards, it would do a circle, it would do like a top down and spin. It did all of these different predefined moves, which is so much better than just using a regular quick shot, because at the end of this, not only do you have like 5 or 10 clips to choose from so that you can edit your own video, but you have a pre-edited video that actually does a pretty good job. Look, I'm gonna say that right now, MasterShots is a good step forward, right? And it's good to see that these cinematic movements that are really easy to do, the pre-programmed cinematic movements, are getting better, because I always thought that they would just be a gimmick, but this is the first time that I've seen something that does a cinematic movement in a predefined way that I actually think could potentially be usable. Like if I'm able to recreate my own cinematic shots, I can plan it myself and then have the drone fly it over and over again to try and get that shot perfect. I think that that could be pretty cool, and I see that that's definitely in the future for DJI as they continue to build out with these MasterShots. I can just imagine, like they do with a lot of their other modes, we'll get like MasterShots 2.0 with a lot more flexibility. That could be pretty cool in a future drone. So yeah, guys, that pretty much wraps up everything you need to know about the Air 2S. Those 3 major upgrades make this a really formidable drone. Is that the right word? It makes it a great option here, really no matter what drone you have. I'd consider this as an upgrade over the Mavic Air 2 and the Mavic 2 Pro because it is starting to show its age. But don't worry, we're going to be going over some reviews, or I guess some comparisons in future videos between the Air 2 and the Air 2S, as well as the Mavic 2 Pro.